My dad told me he would put her in the back seat of his car and he would open all the windows, they didn't have air conditioning at that time, and drive as fast as he could to try to create a cooling effect for her. But she was miserable and depressed about it. And one day in their apartment on the 9th floor in Brooklyn, there was a little family argument with her youngest son. My dad happened to be there. He was the oldest son. And at a break in the conversation when they were arguing about something pretty trivial, apparently, she got up, walked into her bedroom, and jumped out the bedroom window to her death. That is the worst case of autonomic dysregulation due to estrogen dysfunction with the worst possible outcome. And that's what drove me into wanting to learn more about it. But it's relevant not just for mental health, for quality of life, but for what you guys are doing, because you're going to learn how having optimal hormones is essential for the success, whether you're dealing with weight loss, stem cells, cosmetic procedures. You have to have optimal hormones. I could put men in there too, although I always focus on women. You cannot be optimally healthy if you do not have optimal hormones. They give information to the cells to tell them what to do. You heard about, just a minute ago, platelets and growth factors for platelets, right? You're trying to rejuvenate. Well, what hormone do you think helps to produce the growth factors that platelets have? It's estradiol. What's the point of having platelets that don't work, that don't have the ability to create the growth factors that you're looking for? All growth factors rely on estradiol. Well, as an obstetrician in my heyday of doing that for 25 years, I delivered thousands of babies, and it became really obvious to me early on in my career, whether we want to have babies or don't, I'm totally for having babies when and if you want. And keep in mind that humans are the only species on planet Earth that actually determines or wants to determine when and if they have babies. If you took a bunch of cats together, dogs, pick any animal in the animal kingdom, they don't say, this is not a good year to have a baby. Let's not mate. Doesn't work that way, right? So it's really important to understand that the prime directive of life is the creation of new life. And to that end, you need hormones. And they're not, I don't call estradiol, testosterone, progesterone, I don't call them sex hormones. They are life hormones. They are about the creation of life, yes, but also the maintaining of healthy life. Because if you think about it, a human race, to be successful in reproducing itself so that it can maintain the species, for a human female, she needs to have multiple children. She needs to be able to be successful with fertility and pregnancy. You know, you've probably heard this now. Pregnancy is the ultimate stress test of a female body during the reproductive years. And in fact, if a female has any complication during pregnancy, that's a red flag for having metabolic disease and dysfunction later on in life, particularly around perimenopause and thereafter. That's why it should always be part of history taking now, but hasn't been in the past. Asking, were you infertile? Did you have pregnancy problems? These are really critical because pregnancy is the stress test of women, and fertility is a vital sign. A woman or a man who is infertile during the reproductive years, that's a red flag. Something is wrong, right? Something is wrong. Humans should be able to create babies with no effort. So we have estrogen receptors in every organ, everywhere, because estrogen, and I use estrogen, but I'm going to talk about it just for a second, because estradiol E2 is the estrogen produced by ovaries. Estrogen is not a hormone. It's a family of hormones. In human adults, there's E1 estrone, E3 estradiol, that's the dominant one produced in pregnancy by the placenta, and we have little bits of it, little bits of estradiol during the reproductive years, and the dominant one is estradiol. And only estradiol, I'm going to show you a slide with the receptors, only estradiol has the balanced effect on all the estrogen receptors. But every organ system has estradiol receptors. It's so critical to know that. So that's why it is, I call it the hormone of metabolic homeostasis. So what's metabolism? Production, creation, storage, distribution of energy. You heard about electricity, right? You have to have energy. Well, if you flatline, then you're dead, right? Well, energy is what life is, and estradiol is essential for mitochondrial function. Without adequate estradiol, your mitochondria will not optimally work, and they will not be able to have mitophagy. You cannot utilize the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, and when you make the metabolic toxic waste product of superoxide in mitochondria, you have to get rid of it. It cannot diffuse out of the mitochondria. It has to be converted to hydrogen peroxide, and then it can diffuse out and then be turned into harmless water elsewhere in the cell. But in order to get that superoxide, that's two O's together, two oxygens, into hydrogen peroxide so it can get out of the cell, you need manganese superoxide dismutase, a very critical enzyme that requires estradiol. So much of what we talk about with not having enough energy and being tired and not being able to control the cell cycle, which is what tells cells when to die. Old senescent cells should kill themselves, but they don't if you don't have proper functioning mitochondria. And you heard about cell polarity. Guess what? Estradiol is critical for proper cell polarity. You know, it's very interesting how cells migrate and you have the different fibers. All of that requires estradiol. And in men, where does estradiol come from in men? From testosterone. 100% of estradiol derives from testosterone via the enzyme called aromatase. And where is this enzyme aromatase? Well, obviously it's in the ovary because that's how women make estradiol. It's in the placenta, but it's everywhere practically. It's in fat tissue. It's in the prostate gland in men. And it's in skin. You know, you talk about you want to have beautiful young skin. Do you know that when people are old, they don't heal well? There are published studies showing for wound care clinics, topical estradiol helps wounds to heal faster. You know, when you do, especially like on women, I'm not recommending this for men, when you do your procedures, microneedling or lasers, a topical estradiol product will help it to heal faster. I don't think that's being used properly, but you can Google that, wound healing and estradiol. And that's because it creates growth factors in the skin. And men make plenty of estradiol in their skin when they have enough testosterone. That's why testosterone is so important for men. In this slide, you can see when you have proper estrogen, which is really estradiol, you have proper energy balance in your brain, adipose tissue. You want to have healthy fat in the right places, not in the wrong places. You need estradiol. The pancreas for beta cell survival. The liver. After menopause, women have very high rates of what? Now we call it metabolic hepatic steatosis, fatty liver, okay? And proper insulin and glucose regulation in the muscle, which is so critical for creating energy. You don't want to have unhealthy or poor quality muscle. And the immune system. Every immune cell in the body has estrogen receptors. Now, in terms of the menstrual cycle, it's not just about reproduction. When you have the rising rate levels of estradiol in the first part of the menstrual cycle, you're upregulating estrogen receptors, progesterone receptors, thyroid receptors, and testosterone receptors. So if you have a woman who doesn't have enough estradiol, she will always have hypothyroid type symptoms. And why is that? Because the thyroid receptors don't work properly without adequate estradiol, and the thyroid gland itself has receptors to estradiol. And if you have adequate estradiol, then you'll have proper functioning of testosterone receptors. That's why we should never give women who have no estrogen testosterone. That makes absolutely no sense. It's not physiologic either. What about progesterone? Progesterone downregulates testosterone receptors and estradiol receptors, especially the alpha, the one that promotes growth, cell growth. That's how come the uterine lining stops growing in the luteal phase or secretory, the second half of the menstrual cycle. So, and FSH we're learning about a lot too. FSH, there's nothing that does one thing. High levels of FSH are associated with anxiety. Who has high levels of FSH? Menopausal women. So menopause is not just about loss of fertility and periods, it's a huge metabolic shift because none of the organ systems are now going to get adequate estradiol. And there's like this sort of crazy fluctuation, then it goes down, and you have FSH and LH going up. Now, what about the autonomic nervous system that we need to focus on? Well, we have two parts of it. Parasympathetic, which should be the dominant, regular one that you have most of the time. People talk about it as rest and digest. Everything is like copacetic. You know, everything is calm, your arteries are dilated, your heart is beating properly, you have good digestion, you sleep well at night, you're not all stressed, you're not sweaty, everything is normal. And then we have sympathetic stress. Think of that S for stress. That should be induced or only activated when you need it. You're being invaded by pathogens. You've been in an accident. You're injured. That's when sympathetic should be activated. But estradiol modulates the autonomic nervous system. I'm going to show you some slides on that. When you don't have adequate estradiol, you do not have adequate vagal tone. You go into sympathetic state. That's what my poor grandma was always in, high sympathetic. And this really ticked me off when I saw this. I got this off the internet. Look, it says genitals. What happened to the female part? Discrimination everywhere. Oh my gosh. And what's also not here because of that? The ovaries. The ovaries are, of course, involved. Sympathetic regulation of estradiol secretion from the ovaries. The role of autonomic regulation of ovarian function. The sympathetic and vagal nerve branches go to the ovary. Now, what about in the brain? Well, the autonomic nervous system starts in the brain, okay? And it's all also regulated. Cholinergic system. That's like acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter of the vagus nerve. It's also the neurotransmitter that sets memories. What hormone do you think controls the production and function of acetylcholine? Yes! Thank you. That's always the answer to all my quiz questions. A+. So,
that didn't have the answer.
The answer is estradiol.
I figured that, but I didn't hear it.
Oh, thank you for making me repeat it. Okay, so estradiol regulates and modifies and controls the function, receptor function of acetylcholine. Who has more dementia, men or women? Women, 2.5 times. Women don't have enough estradiol to maintain our neurons that make serotonin and acetylcholine and dopamine. All of those neurotransmitters are modulated by estradiol. But it's bidirectional. The autonomic nervous system regulates the ovarian function. That's why when you're always stressed, women have irregular cycles. See, duh, it's like not so mysterious. Now, what about it's bidirectional? Estrogen regulates the autonomic nervous system. I just told you estradiol is critical for the vagus nerve function due to the production of acetylcholine, and norepinephrine and epinephrine are the neurotransmitters for the sympathetic, right? Now, what happens if I gave you an injection of epinephrine? Palpitations, right. So that's part of the sympathetic, right? You get palpitations, tachycardia. So what happens when we have perimenopause and menopause? Here in premenopause, that's like reproductive years, you're overwhelmingly dominant parasympathetic, but a little sympathetic. Then perimenopause, more sympathetic, less parasympathetic. That means you're less calm, you're more stressed. And what's the stress response? Adrenergic, more adrenal activation, so you have more cortisol, you have more epinephrine and norepinephrine, more palpitations, you have vasoconstriction, aldosterone production, so you have more fluid retention. And when you think of all the drugs we use for hypertension, they're like trying to regulate this system. You're trying to get rid of excess fluid, you're trying to create vasodilation, you're using beta blockers to control the excess palpitations and the norepinephrine, epinephrine. It's all like trying to counter a sympathetic response. By age 65, 75% of women have hypertension. And then look what happens here. Autonomic imbalance, that's this one going up as you go into menopause. The maroon one, that's risk of cardiovascular and cognitive disorders. As hormones go down, bad stuff starts happening, and it's related to the autonomic nervous system dysregulation. So here's showing you, in case you didn't believe me, these are the estrogen receptors, alpha, beta, and G protein coupled receptor, progesterone receptors, which is way more complicated than one little box, I can tell you, and FSH receptors. There are receptors for these hormones all over the brain. And here it says reproductive hormone receptors within main brain areas related to cognitive and autonomic regulation. Estrogen signaling has been proposed as a key modulator of women's neurological function associated with learning and memory, executive function, working memory, emotion, motivation, homeostatic regulation, adrenergic, it's for the adrenal gland, and cardiovascular autonomic regulation. And a decline in estrogen signaling may explain symptomatology across menopausal transition. And then progesterone receptors are also everywhere and have a lot to do with neuroprotection. These are vital hormones in the brain, and men make them. These are also called neurosteroids. They're made in the brain. During the reproductive years, men's brains make 6 to 8 times as much estradiol as a female brain. But that's okay, because we should be getting it from our ovaries. But after menopause, women don't have the structure in the brain to convert a lot of estradiol from testosterone. Plus, we don't even have hardly any testosterone compared to a man. So our brains are estradiol insufficient. But a man who has adequate testosterone can keep making plenty of estradiol. And progesterone is also very neuroprotective. That's why every woman, whether she has a hysterectomy or not, she goes on hormone replacement, she needs progesterone, okay? Not a progestin. And men make progesterone in their brains, but women don't make enough. Progesterone is a neurosteroid. There's studies showing that giving progesterone to people who've had traumatic brain injuries, like IV progesterone, can help prevent damage. So this progesterone is very important. And here it shows, oops, let me go back here. Here it shows all the different neurotransmitter related, the glutamate, the GABA, the cholinergic, so all these things, all of this is regulated, modulated by these critical hormones, estradiol and progesterone, all linked in with this, and all linked to the autonomic nervous system. And here is just, I took that little bit and I copied it here, but it's just basically saying that estrogen and progesterone signaling in main areas of autonomic sympathetic control. Estrogen, a female gonadal hormone, exerts regulatory effects on autonomic neural pathways via estrogen receptor signaling, contributing to cardioprotection and neuroprotection throughout the reproductive years. The brain slices reveal neuroconnections in the autonomic nervous system control network. So just so you know, the brain is very involved with, of course, all of these hormones and the autonomic nervous system. This is just in case you forget, G protein coupled receptor, that's what this is in old letters for, works on acetylcholine. The hippocampus is really important for what? Memory. Now, what about the immune system? Here's an immune cell. Here's the brain. Here's the neurotransmitters coming from the sympathetic nervous system. Here's the vagus nerve, afferent and efferent. You can remember the difference. Efferent, I use the E, exit. It's exiting the brain. Efferent neurons are exiting the brain. Afferent are going back. It's bidirectional. And when you have a lot of stress, the sympathetic nervous system activates the adrenal gland, which makes a lot of glucocorticoids, which create more inflammation when it's chronic. So when you don't have enough estradiol or you're in a chronic stress state, you're going to be pro-inflammatory, making all these pro-inflammatory cytokines. If you have a lot of inflammation, are your stem cells going to take? Not well. Estradiol and autonomic regulation will help stem cells to take, to work. Okay, you want them to be implanted and work. And here it's just saying that menopause regulates, is involved with the control of the heart, the autonomic, and this is just saying that, of course, you have decreased heart rate variability, that's beat-to-beat variability. It's reduced when you have no estrogen, and then you increase your risk of heart disease. And this is an interesting study that showed that if you created, this is obviously not in a human, in a rat, where they created a heart attack, you had mitochondrial dysfunction and all vagal dysfunction, because it's all related, but if you gave back E2, estradiol, you actually restored good heart function. They actually have data in humans. When you give IV estradiol to a woman having a heart attack, it actually can be very beneficial to her heart. It's just not standard of care. It never took over at all. But we have data showing estradiol can restore mitochondrial function, normal glutamate levels, and normal vagal function in the heart. Now here, it talks about all the different things that happen when you have autonomic dysfunction involving the brain, anxiety, brain fog, vision, GI tract, everything that can go wrong, and like sweating, flushing, cold feet, poor perfusion, bladder problems. How many women after menopause are dealing with incontinence? How many men are dealing with impotence? Right? All of this is autonomic regulated, and tachycardia, orthostatic hypotension, arrhythmias, palpitations, these are all autonomic dysregulation. Now I'm just going to really run through the gut very quickly, but we know that we should eat fiber. We have microbes in our gut, the gut microbiome. They create short-chain fatty acids. These connect and signal to the brain and to the liver. And the vagus nerve is part of this. It's all interconnected with hormones, neural pathways, and the gut. When you have leaky gut and you have the wrong microbes in the gut, you get neuroinflammation and everything else can go south. Well, what happens when you don't have enough estradiol? You get leaky gut. you get the wrong microbial population. You know what these little blue guys are? Those are enterocytes. You know what they make? GLP-1. There's plenty of data that if you maintain estradiol, you'll maintain proper fat composition, deposition, distribution, and GLP-1 function. And if you do give estradiol, if you do give GLP-1s, I know a lot of you are dealing with weight issues, if you have estradiol, the GLP-1 works better. So that's like, you can Google that. So if you're in weight loss for women, they should all be on physiologic levels of hormones to have GLP-1 optimally work. Because look what happens to those little cells, the little enterocytes. As you age and you don't have adequate estradiol, they shrivel up and eventually disappear. No wonder, have you ever seen what happens to women's bodies as they age? Like, they're very upset. That's why they go to see you. It's like, what is happening? Where's my waistline? Why is my belly growing? You know, it's like very unpleasant. And they could say, but I'm doing everything right. They don't have hormones and their gut is becoming dysbiotic and they have leaky gut. And when you have adequate estrogen, you maintain your blood-brain barrier, your microglia in your brain are right, you have anti-inflammatory state. You cannot have proper function of anything in a chronic state of inflammation, and stem cells don't work great if you put them into an inflamed body. You can't have dysbiosis. We got to work on that. And we have data showing that when women transition into menopause, they all get dysbiosis of their gut microbiome. 100% their gut microbiome goes south, and they get leaky gut. It's not if, it's how bad. It is not if. And it's all interconnected with the autonomic, here's the vagus nerve. And when you have a lot of stress and you have a lot of cortisol, here, like you have stress, and when you're in menopause, you have overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, less vagal tone. You're going to have more adrenergic activity, more cortisol, which even worsens the leaky gut. Okay, and then you have this just domino effect of negativity. And in terms of appetite, when you have adequate estradiol, it works with your GLP-1s in your brain. You have all the brain sites in the hypothalamus, the different peptides that work to regulate appetite are all controlled by estradiol. Without estradiol, women will always have dysregulated appetite. And they've even found that you can identify certain microbes associated with certain conditions. Like here's depression. Probably my grandma had overgrowth and dysbiosis of her gut microbiome with some of these bad dudes. But you can see they've actually linked dysbiosis with specific microbes to different conditions. This opens up a huge future. Who knows where that's going to go? And it's bidirectional. When you have depression, you get autonomic dysregulation, and when you have autonomic dysregulation, you get depression. So what are we going to do about it? We want to do every lifestyle thing we can. We want to feed the gut, fiber, 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 but from real food. So that's why I always talk in favor of carbs. All fiber is carbs. We love carbs, we love fiber, but not processed garbage. We're talking about ancient grains like buckwheat, millet, amaranth, okay? Steel cut and oat groats, and also like root vegetables. We need fiber. Legumes, fantastic. Every kind of bean. If you pick one bean, which one should you pick? Garbanzos. So throw them into everything, garbanzos. And targeted supplements, of course, we can't go into all that. Eat to the beat. That means try to eat most of the food in the morning when our circadian rhythm, which I didn't have a chance to even talk about, which of course is linked to the autonomic nervous system. But eat more, have your patients eat more food in the morning, less at night, don't snack. Time-restricted eating. 13 hours fasting from dinner to breakfast. Have breakfast within 2 hours of awakening. Light therapy. Light is wonderful. There are receptors in the eye that direct light right to the serotonin neurons, so we feel happy. And then from serotonin comes melatonin, so you sleep. That's why you spend a day out in the sun and you sleep like a baby at night, because you make serotonin and then melatonin. Work on sleep hygiene. I can't go in. Exercise is like the magic medicine. Exercise, if you're going to talk about rejuvenation, healthy longevity, it has to include exercise, both aerobic and now, of course, a lot of emphasis on weight training and muscle building in a healthy way. Avoidance of chemical toxicants and hormones. I wish that I could talk to you more about hormones, but I'm just going to say physiologic, don't give progesterone every night orally. That makes absolutely no sense. Progesterone should be given vaginally, because orally, just like oral estradiol, it's converted by the liver into what you don't want. Progesterone is converted 80 to 90% into over 30 metabolites, and you get very little progesterone. It has to be done like all the fertility clinics. Anyone ever have someone who had IVF? 100% of IVF patients have vaginal progesterone. No infertility doctor would ever give oral progesterone.
What for sleep then?
You cannot, when you use progesterone, I'm glad you asked that. When you use progesterone orally, the dominant metabolite is allopregnanolone. Allopregnanolone in proper amounts is very neuroprotective, activates the GABA-A receptor. But when you take progesterone orally, even at 100 milligrams, you're going to get 2.5 times the maximum amount you'd ever have physiologically. It's being used as a pro-drug. You're using it in the same way as if you were using Valium or Xanax. They work in a very comparable way on the GABA receptor. If you are not giving enough estradiol, you're not going to make enough serotonin and melatonin. So that's a whole different lecture, but that is not the right way. There's even published data that if you give progesterone and get too much allopregnanolone every night, you will have weight gain and increased dementia. In rats, it showed rat dementia because you're activating too much GABA. GABA downregulates memory function formation when you do it too much. You have to have, it's like too much of a good thing is a bad thing. That's not how you get people to sleep. You're using it as a pro-drug. But that's, I'm going to have much more coming out in the future on that. So vagus nerve stimulation, you all need to know how to do this for your patients because all your work is going to be more successful. Whether you're doing weight control, stem cells, cosmetics, you're always going to get better outcomes if you have vagus nerve activation. And does everyone get my slides? Are they?
Yes.
Okay, so you don't have to take notes. You got it. And then this is just showing you some of the benefits. It will improve your gut microbiota. Your immune system will become less inflamed. It will help you to have better appetite control, reduce food intake. You'll have less risk. Who has heard of a lot of people with atrial fibrillation? It's like an epidemic, atrial fib. So you can actually lower the risk by using vagus nerve stimulation. You'll lower the risk of dementia and stress. And it works through increasing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is estradiol modulated, reducing inflammation, improving epithelial function of your arteries, neuronal processes for neuroprotection. And we can't talk more about hormones right now, but when you do everything right with adequate light and exercise, love, involvement, and you modify things so you have proper HPA axis regulation and autonomic nervous system regulation. Sometimes you eat, sometimes you don't. Your patients will do so much better. They will be they'll have such better outcomes if you consider hormones and the autonomic nervous system. And I just want to let you know, if you want to, this is your choice, of course. If you want to, that's my QR code. I have free books on thyroid and menopause. If you want it, you can access it. And I believe that's my little menopause book, which I just want you to know, when it came out, Good Housekeeping magazine rated it the #1 best menopause book on the market. That was like 3 years ago. But I have to write more. But I'm doing a little book. I just brought a few books with me. So if anyone wants one, I'm selling them for a discounted price somewhere in the area here. So I hope I didn't go over the timing thing, disappeared a long time ago. So I was working with no guide. So, but I hope that you will love hormones, especially estradiol, as much as I from here on out.